Amazing.
Amazing. I can't believe it. All right. So welcome everyone to this event. We have the wonderful Anja Mori, who is the mathematics director at Wellington International College in Shanghai. And we have myself, Richard Andrew. I run Learn, Implement, Share, and we run PD for teachers, mostly for mathematics teachers, middle and high school. And Anja and I do have a little collaboration going on, which we'll talk about later. But this event we've titled Department-Wide Interventions to Maximise Active Learning in Mathematics Students. So one would hope that both, or at least one of us, knows something about department-wide interventions for mathematics. And it just so happens that for the last 13 years, I think, I've been running department-wide approaches to change, specialising in mathematics. And right now, and for the last 12 months or so, Anja has been in the trenches, so the saying goes, with her department doing exactly this. So before we get deep into this, let's just unpack this active learning thing. Anja, what do we mean by active learning?
Well, active learning is very easy to spot, but there are many things that create active learning. So we can begin with what is passive learning. Passive learning, students are copying, doing everything the teachers tell them to do, replicating teacher's example. They are not thinking, they are not discussing, they are not communicating their understanding, and they are usually bored as well. So passive learning.
Sorry to interrupt.
Is more like rote learning. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just hold that thought. You're basically describing the first few years of my teaching, where I knew it was terrible, but I didn't know what else to do. That's everything you described there. Kids were bored. I was having them copy what I did. All the information came from me. There was no discussion. It was terrible. Anyway, go on. Thanks for that.
Well, there are many teachers still out there, no worries, that would benefit from hearing about rote learning. So it's just these children, basically, they have little sense of control over their activities. But with active learning, students are thinking, discussing, communicating their understanding, grappling with concepts. And they experience a lot of control over the activities. If I just describe one of previous lessons, not one of the lessons, this is how usually my lessons go. I start the lesson with a question: what are we learning today? What are we learning in the last 1 month? And they are firstly asked to discuss in pairs. Then they told me we are learning geometry, trigonometry, circle theorems. And then I asked them to narrow down. So what are the key points here? Perhaps the most challenging or interesting ideas we should remember. So it's a question directed towards pupils to answer, right? And this is how they wake up from perhaps a boring lesson they had. And then if there was homework, they get solutions and they are checking their work, self-reflection. I'm walking around and they are just reporting how they did. And that moment we decide together, they tell me, do we need more practice or do we continue? So simple.
So okay, can I just unpack that? So you're going into the classroom and you're asking them to tell you what's been going on in the recent lessons, which to my way of thinking, that's metacognition. So if these students aren't thinking about what they're doing, if they're just following you, Miss Murray says, I've got to do this, right, so I'll just do that. If they're just in replication mode, they're not going to have much of a clue of what they have actually been doing. So you're putting them on the spot. You're getting them to self-reflect because you're asking them, how much do you know? Do we need to do that more? I used to often say, hands up if you know that you know this. Like I'm just explaining something. Who knows that they know? Okay, so the rest of you watch here, so you're giving them some choice. And twice you've mentioned, before that last little bit, you've mentioned students having a sense of control. Can you explain what that means, students having a sense of control, and why that's so important?
Well, this is how we let them know that they are initiating their learning habits and they are responsible for their learning. Right. And we are not forcing them with repetitive questions. So just asking, okay, there are 10 questions. How strong do we feel that we are? How many questions do you need to do? And then they tell me, oh, can we just do the last 3? And you say, yes, of course, try it. And then they challenge themselves and they decide what they need to do. And then, of course, they are not bored because we are not asking them to do something, right? We are not directing them, but they decide. And the learning itself, it's much more interesting because they decide what they have to do.
And so do you find that just by giving them some choice, because you're talking about choice, aren't you? Choice in all sorts of things, not in an unstructured way, because I know you're very structured, but you're giving them choice within that. And would you say that that is the foundation from engagement? Like that's much more engaging for them to operate that way?
Oh, definitely. They are very enthusiastic about sharing things, especially when I write with the questions, who can? It's like usually I choose 3 people, you will be presenting these 3 examples. And then for other 3 questions, I ask them who can. And usually, especially in the higher sets, they all want to do those who can because they feel challenged and they want to shine. So we give them opportunity to thrive in front of the whiteboard. And this is excitement.
Right. And look, now, so this session is about bringing about these sorts of changes, but I just thought of one thing. Do you know what I did for years? And I didn't stop doing it until I thought, Richard, what are you doing? I used to write up every part of every question that the students were meant to do through the next series of the textbook. You know, question 1's AC, question 2 odds, question 3 skip, question 4 AFGH. For years I used to do this. And then when I started to understand this need for students to have some kind of control over things, I thought, why am I doing this?
I did the same in my first years of teaching. I did the same. And then you model the example on the whiteboard, and ideally you are expecting them to copy. And I very quickly learned that they don't want to copy.
And so I just said, look, okay, new rules here. You have to do a minimum of 4 parts to a question. And if there's only 4 parts, you do half them or whatever. You've got to do a minimum, but you've got to be thinking, how well do I know this? And do some of the harder ones. And if you know that you need to do more, do more. But if you know that you understand that block, go on to the next lot. And
exactly.
Oh my gosh, the difference. Oh, he's given me some, wow, he's trusting me. And, you know, it's like, that's the most basic way of introducing a little bit of student-centeredness or a bit of control, a bit of choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anybody.
I honestly ask them, can I trust you that it's your work, that you have done this and checked your work and we can continue? Do I have this? And then there was, of course, you can trust us. It's funny for them, but they feel, and teacher-student relationship is stemming from the trust, right? There's so many good things about all this. All right, so look, this is a very fast, very short session. We might do some more of these. Depends if you want some more. Let us know in the comments. But so we're aiming to unpack. So we talked about what active learning is, and obviously we're looking at steering teachers towards that, because maybe there's a little bit of resistance in some teachers to adopting that sort of change. And we'll talk about that in a sec. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges and then some tips that heads of department can use if they're in the role of trying to bring about change in teachers' teaching, which is a tricky thing to do. So that's the plan here. And so we're just testing the waters. This is the first one we've sort of done of this, and we might do some more. I'm throwing some links in the chat. There's a newsletter link, because all of these will be, most people will see this on a replay because teachers are too busy to get here en masse. So, but the replays will be in newsletter articles. So if you're subscribed, you're going to see those. There's a fireside chat article, which is a little tip that we hopefully will get to. If you're a bit at loggerheads with a teacher, and I was talking to a head of department recently who was in this situation, so I threw him that link. A link to our department-wide approach, which we'll talk about in a second, and also a calendar link. So if there's things that you like about
what Anja and I are talking about here, and you think, oh, that sounds interesting, jump on the calendar, book me for 20 minutes, half an hour, and we'll just chat and see if you've got issues that we can help you with. So that's what that's all about. So, okay, back to Anja. What about this idea that some teachers are a tad resistant to adopting some of the changes that you're wanting to bring about? Why do you think that is? And if you've got a tip that you can, let's have a discussion about how do heads of department get around that situation?
I think the biggest challenge are the teachers who are very experienced, because if they teach for 20 years in their way and for the poor results and behavior issues, they blame students for work ethic. It is intimidating to try something different, as they might realize it was their problem, not the students, right? Mm-hmm. So it's psychological barriers, and change challenges their sense of security and confidence.
So can I just hold you there? So really what you're talking about is an ego complex, right? So if I've got an ego complex, I'm very confident in what I do. I don't know that I've got an ego complex. That's just the way I am. And so I have behaviors to protect my sense of self. So Anja comes along and says, "Hey, Richard, you do realize that your are your students active in their learning? Are they a bit bored?" Well, yeah. And then I start blaming the students, and you try and suggest something that's different. I'm going to perceive that as a threat because my psychological makeup is protect my wonderful throne here, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the opposite is me. Like, I've always challenged what I've done. I've always sort of been looking for better ways of doing things. So, it's like, I'm sure there's another way. And so you might suggest something to me, and I'll go, wow, okay. I can still be a bit scared because, well, actually, let's talk about that. Why are so there's the ego thing, but there's also, let's say you've got someone who is open. They maybe have been teaching 5 or 10 years, but there's some level of fear there about adopting a change. Why do you think that is?
Well, as you mentioned, it's because they are confident in the quality of their teaching, and they are confident in the quality of their resources, right? And I learned that teachers would not easily change slides or resources so easily. So they truly need to believe that better practices exist. So it's about raising awareness. And how to raise awareness, it's one of the greatest challenges of leaders, right? It
is. And so have a think about a suggestion of something that you've done to help that. But I just want to I want to talk about this awareness thing. And this, because I suspect, I can't prove it, but I suspect that a lot of heads of department, school leaders make this mistake, right? Okay, we need change here. So team, and I might spend some time talking about why we need change. This is what we're going to do. And I'm going to show you these activities, and we're going to use such and such a resource or whatever to justify it, and away we go. Now, I'm taking conservative, traditional teachers who are probably really good at what they do, but they don't realize that their strategies or their approach is actually making their job more difficult and the students' job more difficult. They don't know that, but that's all they know. And I'm coming along saying, you need to do this sort of thing. Now, this sort of thing requires a wider level or a higher level of awareness, a different level of awareness. If they're not there and I'm expecting them to do this, they're going to try and do this thing with this level of awareness, which is very teacher-directed, very controlling, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to work. And then they're going to be justified in saying, well, there you go, Anja, it didn't work anyway. So what my point is, if you want to bring about change, you need to be very aware that there's an awareness change that's required, and think about how can I make this shift? Because as a PD provider, my feeling is, look, I'm providing a whole lot of strategies. Don't implement them if they don't make sense to you. My job is to do things in this professional development that cause you to change your awareness. So then you're going to go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I will have a go at that. I will implement that. Oh my gosh, those kids were so engaged. I can't believe it. Because their awareness had shifted. Anyway, that's a bit of a rant, but I'm saying don't make the mistake of just thinking you can throw new activities at teachers and expect them to work, because the awareness shift is equally as important. And what do you think about that? And can you share anything like a tip or something that you work on to help bring about this awareness?
Well, the tips don't work, yes, if we discuss with them in an abstract manner. So we have to be contextual. And as a leader, I think the main responsibility is that we also get to know teachers, students, and this means that we go into their lessons. So class observations are ideal. And now class observations might sound intimidating for teachers, but I'm really trying to minimize the pressure by walking into their classrooms when they are not teaching, when they are walking around, and when students are on their tasks. And then I talk with the children, and this is how they feel observed.
You're waiting at the door, hearing the talking, and then you won't come in until.
No, we have glass doors that I can see inside, and we have many classrooms. So I'm just walking on the hallway and picking. Who has student-centered activities, and usually this is the time when I enter for 5 minutes.
So let's say I'm on your staff and I'm defensive, like, because I've been teaching for 25 years and I reckon I'm pretty good, and I don't particularly like the suggestions that you're bringing about, but I don't say that verbally, but you can tell that I'm not a fan.
All right. Yes.
And now you have the audacity to come into my classroom, but I'm not getting angry at you, but there's that sort of passive resistance there. How do you get around that?
Well, I have a very nice example from last week, when a teacher is a bit resistant, and I have observed a lesson which was very teacher-centered. Teacher was showing all sorts of applets and things were jumping, but he was speaking most of the time, and many concepts were introduced. And I can't say to teachers that it is wrong, but
sorry. So that's sounding like what a lot of observers would say, well, this is a really good lesson because it's active and there's a lot of bells and whistles and there's a lot of good explicit explanation of concepts. All right.
Yes. For a random observer, would seem very beautifully structured lesson as well. It was, but when I was walking around and when they received those worksheets, they couldn't do much because they were just observing there, right? They didn't take a lot of notes, and of course they couldn't be focused. You can't be focused more than 10 or 15 minutes, in my opinion. So I just challenged the teacher, we agree that how can we check for their understanding? And I suggested that next lesson, he starts with a blank sheet of paper and just asked his students, what do you remember from the previous lesson? And he did.
What did he think? Did he say what he thought they would say?
We have very good relationships, so it was funny, but that's why, because he was amused and he was intrinsically interested. If I'm right that they didn't remember a lot, like, I know that he didn't want to prove it to me that I'm wrong and he's right. He just wanted to see, is it really the case? And then at the end, when he got about half of the children that couldn't write anything, they didn't remember anything without their notebooks open, I think that his awareness has changed. And next time he will speak less. And now our target is more student-centered activities, right? And this is our target now for next month. And then I will drop in again, and then we will discuss, has this changed?
Beautiful. You see, here's the thing. A lot of teachers understand that conceptual understanding is important, but they think, oh, okay, I've got to get better at explicitly explaining the understanding behind this procedure, behind this theorem or whatever. So I'm a lot better than I used to explain this 3 years ago, right? Because now I'm using GeoGebra and now I'm using this and now I'm using that. And all those things are great. But what they don't realize is that understanding actually happens from within the child when they can have an experience where they start connecting the dots internally, and that the aha moment comes from within. But they have to be doing something that is not copying whatever the teacher is asking them to do, and it's not just listening to the teacher or watching what they're doing. That's important. What they're doing, the explicit explanations, is important. But I think the missing piece is, for 5 or 10 minutes, the students need to be doing some kind of activity that's not attached to a procedure, that has them dive, explore, talk with their mates, collaborate, and explore this concept where they can't fall back on a procedure and they can't just copy whatever the teacher does. And then they go, oh, all right. And so then when the procedure or the formula comes out, which the teacher can hoodwink the students into thinking that they've developed this themselves, because sometimes you can do this collectively, then the kids go, oh, all right, that's what we were doing before. Is that a fair summation of a missing piece? That would you agree that that's often missing in teaching?
Well, definitely, yeah. There's like teachers should understand that traditional, typical questioning techniques are not always the best solution. And within our course, we are mentioning all the time the mini lessons. This means that you're engaging just with few pupils, right? Or just interesting examples. What we do here is not actually asking questions. This means that they cannot recall a procedure because there is no question. For example, if we are doing geometry, you show them a picture, graph or something, and we discuss what could the questions be. So they are building the questions, and this is how we are checking for conceptual understanding. What is that there we see, and this is how we prevent recalling the procedure from their long-term memory.
Right. Now, you did mention one word before which caught my attention, and that was the word course. So I guess we should spill the beans for those who don't know. So Anja did a very old version of one of my major PDs. That was the precursor to the Engaged Mathematics PD about 3 years ago. And I was particularly interested that from three things. One, Anja was from China, or teaching, her school was in China, and very switched on. And I was thinking my PDs could work well overseas, but I didn't have a sort of a connection there. So I was very keen to talk to Anja, and we did have a chat and decided to create something that was more in line with a high-performing school, international school, that type of thing. It doesn't have to be an international school, and so we hacked that PD to bits, and then Anja put a whole lot more stuff in there. So that's a PD. So that's an online program where it stretches out over more than 12 months, about half an hour a week, of people accessing the online content. And there's a lot of self-reflection, so a lot of awareness shifting, and a lot of implementations of strategies. That's the key, because any PD that doesn't require teachers to implement strategies basically isn't going to bring any change. So that's the PD side of it. But what Anja's doing is running this as a department-wide approach, which is where I come into it as well. And so that simply has the head of maths, or the maths director, and the whole team engaged in the PD at the same time. So rather than Anja having to be the one who is saying, right, here's another strategy I want you to do, and I want you to got to do this by this week, and being the one imparting all the information, which only exasperates any kind of headbutting that might be going on anyway. Like, if it's just difficult for a head of department to do that on their own. Anja's now more one of the team, even though she's observing and doing all the things that she wants to do. There's the source of the resources and the framework is online that Anja's a part of. And so, and I'm not just talking about Anja's situation. I've had a lot of heads of department who've gone through this process, and they find that being one of the gang doing this PD makes it a lot easier to bring about the change, because their role then becomes supportive and collaborative and so on. So if there's a link there that explains the department-wide approach. So that's what so Anja's not only, she's in a special case because she's not only had something to do with this PD, helped to create it, she's also the team leader on site bringing that about. So it would be good just, Anja, to how does having the online PD with the resources and blah, 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 how does that help you in your role of bringing about change across your department?
Well, we have teachers from all around the world, right? And it's very important for a leader to share the schools and departments' pedagogical vision.
Right.
And with just handing them the curriculum, they will do what they normally do, what they did in UK, what they did in the States, or wherever around the world. But this PD helps me to deliver the message of what we are aiming towards. So we want active learners, interested, confident communicators, and all this results from giving student agency and teaching for understanding and not for exams.
But, so you've said it doesn't help so much for exams. I think, are you saying there it's not a 95% focus on exam results, but
exactly,
by focusing on agency and understanding and collaboration and having the students express their understanding, that ultimately helps them do well.
Exactly, yes. Exam results are the byproduct of good teaching. This is what I always say. We don't have to teach for exams, but we get excellent results, of course, because they are not confused with questions being different and so on, because they're just used to it, right?
I'm not going to explain this in any detail, but I will just drop in here that one of Anja's tricks to exam preparation is having students sit in a circle, talking mathematics, bringing their own questions. Like, I've seen this on video, and we've got a whole module on this because Anja showed me one little video she'd had and said, "Well, do you think we should do something with this?" And after I fell off my chair and recovered and thought, this is amazing. Imagine a bunch of students respectfully discussing in a very enthusiastic way for 60 minutes mathematics, and no one is writing on a whiteboard. Unbelievable. So this is one of the modules that we get teachers to do. Anyway, little side. So this is that, I see that as fantastic exam prep. So you're an IB school. So is this program only for IB?
Of course not. We don't have MYP program, which is the second stage of IB. We just have IB. It's to provide better education in any school program, so, English or even non-English program. Right?
And it's interesting because I'm talking to a lot of leaders from all countries across the world, and you hear about other different focuses of different programs. And at the end of the day, the people I talk to anyway, they want to get better. They want their teachers to get better at having responsible learners who understand what they're doing. And at the end of the day, if that's what you're on about, it sounds very simple, and it is simple, but there is a lot of moving parts to that. A good way to start is, am I producing passive learners? Yes. What causes the passive learners? Oh, okay, but let's do less of that and let's do more of these things which create active learners, and not just once a month. Right? And this is another thing that happens, right? So I'm trying to bring about, you laughed, I'm bringing about change in my department, and here's another good activity. Oh, that one looks pretty good, Richard. I'll try that once a month. Meanwhile, the rest of the time, I'm just going to do skill and drill because that's the only way I know how to get through the syllabus. But would you argue that this way of teaching, the way you're teaching now, which is very much about having the students collaborate, communicate, understand, and do the practice, and it's controlled and explicit teaching, but you're giving them a sense of control. Would you say that is at least as time efficient as the traditional model, if not more time efficient? Or would you say, because most people say, oh, but this is great, Anja, but it takes too much time. We can't do it because it takes too much time.
No, I save time, because you just avoid repeating the examples, and you avoid doing chapter by chapter and then finalizing that they still can't do the interleaved practice, that the mixed examples are still a challenge. So you do everything together, not everything, but maybe 3 topics in a conceptual manner, and you save time because it's also then it's more fun, it's more interesting that they have to think when they approach each problem. But this way of teaching is not that I would be performing, and I'm terrible with classroom jokes, and I'm terrible with any performances, with those activities that are trying to show mathematics fun. I'm not doing any of this. It's just the way we teach, and we involve them in the learning process all the time.
That's an interesting point. If I can flesh that out, I think what you're saying there is you're engaging your students, but it's not external, and it's not external engagement from like being the clown and telling jokes and being that, which is fine. If you are super charismatic, then that's certainly going to help. You're saying that your engagement is intrinsic, and the students get engaged because they are having a sense of control of this highly structured framework that they're working in, but they feel empowered with what they're doing, and they're understanding it, and they're collaborating and sharing their understanding, and that is fun, and that's where the agency comes from.
Exactly. Okay. They have no fear of telling, can we do more of this, or we don't have to do this, and that's the aim. Yeah.
We're running out of time. Maybe just a couple of minutes to finish off. Just a couple of things that you might suggest that helps you to win your teachers over. You've already mentioned that example of showing what's actually going on from the student's perspective, but something else that you consciously use as a leader to bring the teachers over to your
I would say that I always, when I walk into the classroom or just when we discuss something, I praise good practice. So taking everyone's strengths and ask them to share with others, or we very often initiate the teachers should be observing each other. And this is how we share that we are not perfect. No one is ideal. Just take the best practices of everyone.
Do you, and when you encourage people to observe each other, do you also put some rules in there and say, like, give them two things that you know that they like, and one?
We had at the beginning of the year, we had a very structured, then we had assigned learning trios, and they had to decide on two major foci, what they want to observe, and it was agency or technology or just student-centeredness or whatever. And then at the end, they reported what they have observed with each other. But now we have very much open. They have to write their names when their doors are open for their classrooms, and they can expect that there will be, I don't know, 5-6 teachers just dropping in, or no one will. Just they share their classroom in a very open manner. And this is one thing. And what is, I'm not ashamed of recognizing my weaknesses. I like to share what I'm bad at. For example, recently we had a project work, and I was really disappointed about the way how my students worked with each other. They were just not used to it. It was first project that we did. And so I asked teachers openly in the meeting what strategies they have to help students collaborate. And then we had a wonderful discussion, because everyone wants to share what they are doing. And usually if I'm struggling with something, with a method or a collaboration or something, it's not just me, it's many teachers, and they cannot identify themselves, right?
I think that what you're talking about there is transparency, and
yeah.
You know, if you have a department, you need a level of transparency. You need teachers to feel safe at being able to walk in and say, I just had my year 9s. I think that's possibly the worst lesson I've ever taught in my life. You know, to be able to get that off your chest.
It happens. Yeah.
It happens. But as a leader, if you can say the same thing, and this is what a lot of leaders won't do, because it's like, oh, I have to be bulletproof. I've got to be perfect. No, be honest. And
just be honest. Yeah.
It's so powerful, isn't it? Like you'll win. It's one of the easiest ways. I mean, you've got to obviously be, don't go overboard, but set up that transparency and show people that you can be vulnerable, and you'll get the respect back. Yeah. So look, Anja, let's call it that. We could talk for hours on here. If you're watching this on a replay, just in the comments section, if you'd like us to discuss some other issues, put that in the comments. If you disagree with anything, let us know. But seriously, if some of this intrigues you and you think, well, I'd like to know more about how this department-wide thing works, book us for a Zoom call. there's no pressure. It's just, let's talk about your situation and I'll explain what we can offer. And if we can work something out, then great. Worst case scenario, we just have an interesting chat and you might get some tips anyway. So that's what that's all about. Thanks for watching on the replay and for those who are live. And thanks for your attendance and your contributions, Anja. That's great to hear what you're doing there. So keep up the great work.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.